On November 15, 2004, Peter Porco was found dead in his home in Bethlehem, New York. Nearby, his wife had been bludgeoned and was clinging to life. The horrific crime scene seemed to leave more questions than answers about the events that had led to the brutal attack. The pair had been attacked with an axe, and a cut screen in the garage window suggested someone had broken in. However, a short investigation quickly led police to charge a suspect, Christopher Porco, the couple's 21-year-old son. Porco was a student at the University of Rochester, nearly 4 hours away. He insisted that he'd been in his college dorm the night his parents were attacked, but surveillance footage and evidence from toll booths along the highway between Bethlehem and Rochester suggested otherwise. As the investigation unfolded, police learned that Christopher Porco had been fighting with his parents in the weeks leading up to the attack. With this information, Porco was convicted of murder and sentenced to at least 50 years in prison, yet he remains adamant that he is innocent. Christopher Porco's disagreements with his parents, Peter and Joan Porco, began long before he crept into their home and bludgeoned them with an axe in the middle of the night. According to reports, they'd been arguing about his grades for a year prior to the attacks. Porco had been forced to withdraw from the University of Rochester after the fall 2003 semester due to failing grades. He told his parents it was because a professor had lost his final exam, and he enrolled at Hudson Valley Community College for the spring 2004 term. He was accepted back into the University of Rochester in fall 2004, but only because he'd forged his transcripts from the community college. Porco again told his parents that the lost exam had been found and that the school was covering his tuition costs to compensate for the misunderstanding. In reality, Christopher Porco had taken out a $31,000 loan by forging his father's signature as a cosigner. He used the money to pay his tuition and purchase a yellow Jeep Wrangler. When Peter Porco found out about the loan, he was livid. He emailed his son in early November 2004, writing, "Did you forge my signature as a cosigner? What the hell are you doing? I'm calling Citibank this morning to find out what you have done." Christopher Porco refused to answer calls from either of his parents, so his father emailed him once more, "I want you to know that if you abuse my credit again, I will be forced to file forgery affidavits." He followed up with, "We may be disappointed with you, but your mother and I still love you and care about your future." Less than 2 weeks later, Peter Porco was brutally murdered. Early in the morning of November 15, 2004, Christopher Porco disabled his parents' burglar alarm, cut their phone line, and crept into their quiet, suburban home as they slept. He entered their bedroom and started swinging a fireman's axe at their heads. Porco then got in his Jeep and began the drive back to the University of Rochester. According to the Times-Union, despite his devastating injuries, Peter Porco didn't die immediately. In fact, he even got out of bed and went about his morning routine in a macabre daze. A trail of blood at the crime scene showed that Peter had walked to the bathroom sink, tried to load the dishwasher, packed his lunch, and written a check to pay for one of Christopher's recent parking tickets. He then went outside to get the newspaper, realized he'd locked himself out, and somehow had the presence of mind to open the door using a hidden spare key before collapsing in the home's foyer. When a coroner later examined him, they discovered he'd been bashed in the skull 16 times with the axe and was missing part of his jaw. When Peter didn't show up for work as a law clerk that morning, a court officer was dispatched to his home to check on him. He walked into the grisly scene and immediately called 911. Officers arrived to find Joan Porco still in bed, clinging to life. A portion of her skull was missing, as well as her left eye. She was rushed to the hospital and placed into a medically induced coma, but not before telling one of the officers that her son was the culprit. According to the Times-Union, Christopher Bodish, a detective with the Bethlehem Police Department, questioned Joan Porco about her attacker as paramedics were stabilizing her. He claimed that she shook her head no when he asked if her oldest son, Jonathan, was behind the attacks. But when he asked if Christopher was guilty, she nodded her head yes. However, when Joan awoke from her medically induced coma later, she said she couldn't actually remember anything and that Christopher was innocent. Nevertheless, police had already begun investigating Christopher Porco, and they found that his alibi for the evening was a lie. Porco said he'd been sleeping on the couch in his college dorm all night, but his roommates said they'd watched a movie in the common area and hadn't seen him there. What's more, security cameras at the University of Rochester captured his easily identifiable yellow Jeep leaving campus at 10:30 p.m. on November 14 and returning at 8:30 a.m. on November 15. Toll booth collectors along the route from Rochester to Bethlehem also recalled seeing the yellow Jeep. Porco's DNA was later found on one of the toll tickets, proving he was indeed the person driving the Jeep. Christopher Porco was arrested for his father's murder, but he maintained his innocence throughout his trial. What's more, Joan Porco even argued in her son's favor. In a letter to the Times-Union, she wrote, "I implore the Bethlehem police and the district attorney's office to leave my son alone, and to search for Peter's real killer or killers so that he can rest in peace and my sons and I can live in safety." Despite Joan's pleas, Christopher Porco was found guilty of second-degree murder and attempted murder and sentenced to a minimum of 50 years in prison. After his conviction, he insisted in an interview that his father's true killers were still out there. "At this point," he said, "I have little confidence that they will ever be caught." On August 12, Lisa Theris emerged from the Alabama woods. After spending 28 days lost in the wilderness, she had made her way to Highway 82 near Union Springs when a passing motorist found her walking naked, scarred, and sunbaked alongside the road. Since then, Theris' bizarre ordeal, which she reportedly survived only by drinking muddy water and eating wild mushrooms and berries, has become the subject of intense investigation. Now, however, authorities have revealed why they believe Theris disappeared in the first place and how she managed to stay lost for so long. She was high on meth. Police working on the case contend that the 25-year-old Theris was disorientated and suffering from hallucinations brought on by taking methamphetamine. This could very well explain why Theris never found her way out of the woods despite reportedly never being more than a mile from the nearest road. "I think she was on meth, she was hallucinating and she just got lost in the woods," Bullock County Sheriff Raymond Rogers told the Daily Mail. "She was probably so under the influence on drugs that she stripped her clothes off. She was in a strange place she came to, she didn't know where she was." Theris allegedly took the drugs with two local men, 36-year-old Randall Wade Oswald and 31-year-old Manley Green Davis, both well known to law enforcement because of previous arrests for petty crime and drugs. Then, Oswald and Davis allegedly took Theris with them as they burglarized a nearby hunting lodge on July 19, just after Theris spoke to her parents for the last time before her disappearance. However, as the men prepared to ram through the lodge's metal entrance gate, Theris reportedly jumped out of the truck and into the woods. The two men have since been arrested for the burglary and implicated in Theris' disappearance, with each even accusing the other of killing Theris in the days before she was found. Oswald once told authorities that Davis had shot the girl in the head, placed her body in a garbage bag and tossed it into creek. However, of course, police obviously found no body. They were so geeked out that they started blaming each other for a murder that didn't happen. While Oswald and Davis were hurling accusations at each other, Theris was surviving in the woods alone, which authorities believe to be true, despite the extraordinary dangers she faced. Between the venomous snakes and spiders, the coyotes, the lack of food and water, and the consistently scorching temperatures, Theris very well could have died. But, of course, she survived, albeit with sunbaked skin covered in cuts, bug bites, and poison ivy welts, not to mention that she was some 40 to 45 pounds lighter than when she went in. And now that Theris has returned to civilization and the matter of her disappearance has been put to bed, authorities have now turned their attention toward her culpability in the events that directly preceded her disappearance. Beyond merely taking meth, Theris may have, some suspect, participated in the hunting lodge burglary and even willfully stayed in the woods to avoid law enforcement. In the words of George Oswald, Randall's father and the manager of the burglarized lodge, "I'm extremely angry with my son, he's embarrassed my name, he's stolen from my good friends and he's got a lot of questions to answer. But if she's a sweet little princess who got lost in the woods for all this time, then I'm the Pope, it's just not possible." For his part, Rogers states that he has not yet ruled out charging Theris in the burglary for which Oswald and Davis are now being held. Whether or not Theris will join Oswald and Davis now depends on the ongoing investigation of a strange story that's only growing stranger. Beginning in 1978, Christian Gerhartsreiter took on numerous identities as he conned and killed his way into America's upper crust, then passed himself off as a distant relative of the Rockefeller family for 16 years. In 1996, Clark Rockefeller married a successful businesswoman named Sandra Boss, who was 7 years his junior. As Rockefeller was proud of boasting, he was a descendant of the famous Rockefeller family. But despite his connection to one of the richest families in the world, he didn't seem to have any access to the Rockefellers' wealth. Nor had Rockefeller ever held a steady job, bouncing around Wall Street from firm to firm before becoming what he called a freelance banker working to solve third-world debt. Instead, Clark Rockefeller funded a lavish lifestyle entirely on his wife's income. He needed her money to buy his extensive art collection, antique cars, and hand-tailored suits, because he didn't actually have any money of his own. And as the lies he constantly told mounted up, Boss began to suspect that she didn't know her husband at all. As it turns out, she was right. Because her husband's name wasn't Clark Rockefeller. It was Christian Gerhartsreiter. And he was hiding a complicated and murderous past. Christian Hans Gerhartsreiter was born in the Bavarian town of Bergen, Germany, in 1961. At the age of 17, he left home and moved to the United States, telling the immigration authorities at JFK Airport that an American couple had offered to let him stay with them while he went to school in the U.S. This was a half-truth. Gerhartsreiter had in fact met an American family on a train in Germany who offered to put him up if he ever found himself in Berlin, Connecticut. But the Savio family had no idea he was coming. And when he arrived at their door, he somehow convinced them to let him stay for months as a foreign exchange student. Gerhartsreiter told his adoptive family that he was the son of European aristocrats. And his refusal to do even basic work around the house, including making breakfast for himself and doing his own laundry, quickly began to bother the Savios. He made it clear that living in this manner was beneath him, the author Edward Savio, the family's eldest son, said. We kicked him out. Rather than return to Germany, he found more host families to live with. But Gerhartsreiter soon outgrew small-town New England and had resolved two things, to make his immigration status permanent and head to California to become an actor. By 1980, Gerhartsreiter had anglicized his name to Chris Gerhardt and found himself auditing classes at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. There, he met and married a woman named Amy Gersold for a green card on February 20, 1981. Within weeks of the wedding, he was gone. By the time he reached California, he was calling himself Christopher Chichester, sometimes adding Mountbatten as a middle name to add to his pedigree. And he handed out business cards that called himself the 13th Baronet, complete with a fake family crest. Soon, he managed to ingratiate himself into the Tony Los Angeles suburb of San Marino and found an elderly and reclusive woman named Didi Sowas to let him move in with her. He even audited classes at the University of Southern California Film School and convinced a local TV station to give him a public access show. But the situation quickly became more complicated when Didi's son, John Sowas, and his wife, Linda, moved in. Jonathan soon began asking questions about his mother's guest and the way he seemed to be using her money to buy expensive clothing for himself. Then, in 1985, Jonathan and Linda suddenly disappeared. According to Gerhartsreiter, they had been called away on urgent business to Europe. Soon, Christopher Chichester disappeared as well. He eventually turned up in Connecticut, where he tried to sell John Sowas's car without registration, under the name Christopher Crow. In Connecticut, Crow talked his way into a position as an executive at a brokerage firm. But he was fired after the company discovered the social security number he gave them actually belonged to convicted serial killer David Berkowitz, New York's Son of Sam. He managed to secure two other highly paid jobs before the discovery of a corpse thought to be Sowas in San Marino in 1994 led police to begin looking for Christopher Crow in connection with the murders. But by that time, Christian Gerhartsreiter had already been living as Clark Rockefeller for 2 years. In 1992, Christian Gerhartsreiter reinvented himself again, claiming to be James Frederick Mills Clark Rockefeller, from a lesser-known branch of the Rockefeller family. Using this identity, Gerhartsreiter found that he could impress the wealthy, upper-class circles he moved in. And in 1993, he met Sandra Boss at a cocktail party in New York City. She quickly fell in love with the charming young Rockefeller. But over a decade of marriage, Clark Rockefeller became increasingly controlling and occasionally violent. And many people close to the couple began questioning why none of the stories about his past added up. In 2006, Boss hired a private investigator to look into Rockefeller's background. And when she discovered that he had been lying for years about who he was, Boss filed for divorce. Gerhartsreiter settled for $800,000 and a chance to avoid anyone working for the court looking too hard into his real identity. But he also agreed to only 3 visitations with his daughter a year. Everything in this man's life was a lie, journalist Mark Seal, who wrote a book on Gerhartsreiter, told News. The only real thing in his life was his love of his daughter. And when he lost his daughter in a bitter divorce, he began plotting how to get her back. After a court-supervised visit in Boston, Gerhartsreiter managed to shake off the social worker and abducted his daughter. Once more, Gerhartsreiter changed his name and identity, this time to a sea captain called Chip Smith, and headed to an apartment in Baltimore. Luckily, the FBI managed to track him down. According to NBC, they managed to lure him out of the apartment by telling him that his catamaran was sinking at the marina. As soon as he left his apartment, agents surrounded him. Luckily, his daughter was unharmed. Initially, Christian Gerhartsreiter, aka Clark Rockefeller, was given a 7-year prison sentence for the abduction. But shortly after the trial, police began building a case against him for the murder of Jonathan Sowas back in 1985. And in 2013, Gerhartsreiter was given a life sentence in prison for the murder, proving that not even a man with an incredible gift for deception like Gerhartsreiter can escape the truth forever. Mick Philpott played the role of the grieving father after the deaths of 6 of his children, but he was hiding a sickening secret. Jade Philpott, 10, and her brothers Dwayne, 13, John, 9, Jack, 8, Jesse, 6, and Jaden, 5, all died in a devastating fire at their home in Derby on May 11, 2011. Along with wife Mairead, tearful Mick pleaded for the public to help find who was responsible for starting the blaze during an emotional police press conference. However, the Philpotts were actually behind the horrific arson attack, which was part of a twisted plot to get a bigger council house, along with their pal Paul Mosley. Philpott was sentenced to life with a minimum of 15 years for manslaughter and was branded a disturbingly dangerous man with no moral compass by the judge at the trial. While Mairead and Mosley received 17-year sentences for manslaughter and have now both been freed from prison after serving half of their sentences. Mick Philpott, 56, his wife Mairead, 31, and a friend involved in the plot, Paul Mosley, 46, were all convicted of manslaughter after setting ablaze their Derby home, meaning to blame the inferno on Philpott's former lover, who left him. Instead, the fierce heat and smoke engulfed the home, leading to the deaths of 6 children aged 5 to 13 years, including 5 of Philpott's 17 children and a son of Mairead from a previous relationship. The jury was not told Philpott had a previous conviction in 1978 for attempting to murder a woman who wanted to leave him, whom he stabbed a dozen times. Such was Philpott's hold on women that after the fire that killed his children he got his wife to perform a sex act on the third co-conspirator, Mosley, which the Crown said was carried out to keep him on side as part of the plot. Philpott had children with 5 partners, claiming welfare benefits for himself and forcing women in his life to hand over money to him. He also exploited public sympathy after the fire to try to benefit from money donated for the funerals of the children, Jaden, 5, Jade, 10, John, 9, Jack, 8, Jesse, 6, and 13-year-old Dwayne. On the night of the fire, neighbors tried to rescue the children from the burning house, but were beaten back by the smoke and flames. When the bodies of the children were carried out of the house by police, Philpott ran forward and had to be restrained. Assistant Chief Constable Steve Cotterill of Derbyshire Police said, "This was an evil, stupid, shameful act which has resulted in the deaths of 5 of his own children. Personally, I've found it very upsetting. I've become extremely angry at the needless loss of life. 6 little kids there that have not got the chance to grow up. 5 vacant chairs on the Monday morning at that primary school must have been horrendous not only for the teaching staff, but for all the other little kids there as well." In a highly unusual move, the families of the Philpotts said they were happy with the guilty verdicts that left Mick and Mairead Philpott facing lengthy jail terms when they are sentenced on Wednesday. Philpott's sister, Dawn Bestwick, said, "My family and I have attended court each and every day and listened objectively to all the evidence in this trial to understand what happened to our 6 beautiful children on May 11, 2012. Our presence in court was to find out the truth. Following today's verdict we, the family of Michael Philpott, believe justice has been served." Mairead Philpott's family, the Duffy family, said in a statement, "The children were taken away in the cruelest way imaginable by the very people who were supposed to love and protect them. Justice has been served and we are happy with the verdict." As the jury delivered its verdicts in respect of Philpott, he stood in the dock staring straight ahead with his hands clasped in front of him. He shook his head when guilty verdicts were read out for his wife. She looked down at the floor and fought back tears while clutching a tissue in both her hands. The court did not hear that, 35 years ago, Philpott crept into the home of Kim Hill after she wrote him a letter ending their relationship. Hill, who was 17 at the time, was in bed when he attacked her, knifing her more than a dozen times, before turning on her mother, Shirley, a nurse. Philpott, aged 21 at the time of the attack, was convicted of the attempted murder of Hill and of grievous bodily harm to her mother in December 1978. He was sentenced to 7 years, with the judge warning that he was a dangerous man. But the flaws that made Philpott a larger-than-life character in his local area would also lead to his downfall. Days after the children's deaths, Philpott gave a tearful press conference where he acted like an excited child rather than a grief-stricken parent, raising police suspicions. In the aftermath of the fire on May 11 last year, detectives put the Philpotts and Mosley up in a hotel room that was bugged. The trio were overheard checking their stories with each other. The Crown alleged the fire was started with Philpott as the prime organizer in a plan to frame his former lover, Lisa Willis, who had walked out with their 4 children 3 months earlier. Philpott had lived in the property with Willis and Mairead, who was the mother of the 6 children who were killed. He had sexual relationships with both women, alternating between the two. But Willis, who said she was kept a virtual prisoner by Philpott, walked out on him, taking her 5 children with her, in February last year. She had 1 child from a previous relationship. The fire at the council house in Victory Road took place hours before Philpott was due to face Willis in court for a custody hearing. The jury heard how Philpott had spread rumors after Willis left that she wanted to firebomb the house, all part of his attempt to frame her for the fire. The plan was for Philpott to rescue his children and for Willis to be prosecuted for arson, the court heard. But it went horribly wrong when the blaze took hold fast. The adults escaped the house, but the 6 children died as they slept. Cotterill said Philpott's behavior at a press conference that he had chosen to give days after the fire had increased police suspicions. After 30 years of doing what I do, I have never seen anybody having suffered that magnitude of loss deal with it in the manner in which he dealt with it, Cotterill said. I would have expected him to be completely and utterly destroyed and, if push came to shove, not able to present himself at the press conference. He entered the room in quite a jovial manner as though it was a bit like an excited child, really inappropriate. In my view, he was the father of 5 children, in essence 6 children, who had died in his house. I didn't see it as anything to be excited about. If anything, he should be rather fearful of the experience and wary of it. I didn't see a great deal of emotion and upset. Derby City Council said a serious case review was being held into social services engagement with the family. From 2000 to 2012, there was no social services involvement with the family. Philpott also abused the goodwill of the community in Allenton, who raised more than £15,000 to pay for funerals for all 6 children. He demanded that any money left over should be given to his family in Argos vouchers. He also demanded that hundreds of teddy bears left outside the burnt-out house should be auctioned off and the money given to him. He told one organizer, "Shut up and just get on with it." The trio will be sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court. Netflix is known for producing some shocking true crime documentaries which have kept viewers on the edge of their seats. The latest documentary, The Girl in the Pictures, tells the horrifying truth about a young girl called Sharon Marshall who was abducted as a child by her stepfather Franklin Delano Floyd, who then went on to marry the girl he had raised as a daughter. She was later found dead by the side of the road. Sharon Marshall, whose name was actually Suzanne Marie Savakis, was born on September 9, 1969. Her mother was named Sandy Chipman and Suzanne was one of Sandy's 4 children. She had 2 other daughters called Allison and Amy and a son called Philip. Chipman was married to Franklin Delano Floyd, who went by many fake names including Brandon Williams. In 1975, Chipman had to serve a 30-day prison sentence for posting bad checks, and during this time Floyd abducted all of her children and disappeared. Sharon would have been 5 or 6 years old at the time. At the time, police allegedly refused to take any action as they said Floyd was allowed to take the children as he was their stepfather. This didn't stop Chipman looking for her children. She later found 2 of her daughters, who had been left in foster care, but her only son Philip and daughter Suzanne remained missing. Floyd had taken Suzanne with him, but had renamed her Sharon Marshall so she could not be found. Philip's whereabouts remained unknown for a long time, but in 2019 the now adult Philip took a DNA test which revealed his true identity after he suspected he was the missing child. It was later found that Floyd had put him up for adoption. Floyd raised Suzanne as his own daughter, enrolling her at an Oklahoma City school under the false name of Sharon Marshall. Sharon was said to be a brilliant student and earned a scholarship to Georgia Tech University to study aerospace engineering. Floyd stopped her from pursuing her dreams after she got pregnant by another man, however, and forced her to work as an exotic dancer and stripper and go by various aliases including Tanya Tadlock. Floyd abused Sharon for years as she grew up, and he went on to marry the girl he raised as a daughter when she was around 16 years old. They lived together in the United States, where she raised her son Michael. Sharon had gone out to shop for baby items for her 2-year-old son Michael in April 1990, when she was found lifeless at the side of a highway. She was 20 years of age at the time and had bruises and a bleed to the brain. She was rushed to a local hospital but died there. Police first assumed she was the victim of a hit and run, but came to suspect Floyd of Sharon's murder, though he said he was asleep at the time and they weren't able to tie him to the crime. There was blunt force trauma to the back of Sharon's head not consistent with a car accident. Floyd later kidnapped Sharon's son Michael at gunpoint from his school and went on to admit to the FBI that he shot him in the head and killed him on the same day he kidnapped him. Sharon's death was a mystery for decades, but then her real identity was revealed almost 25 years after she died in 2014. 5 years after Sharon's death, a mechanic found an envelope in a truck he had recently bought which contained 97 photos of a severely beaten missing woman named Cheryl Ann Camesso. Cheryl Ann was Sharon's colleague, and Floyd had punched in the face during a disagreement in front of witnesses. Cheryl Ann went missing in 1989 and her remains were found in 1995, but her identity wasn't known until the pictures emerged. The authorities traced the truck back to Floyd and found the injuries on Cheryl's body were consistent with those seen in the grisly images. On that basis, Floyd was convicted of murdering Cheryl Ann in 2001 and he was handed the death penalty, although as of 2022 he remains behind bars on death row. The envelope also contained images of Sharon being abused as a child, when she was as young as 4, and also as a teenager. Authorities believe Floyd killed Sharon because she tried to leave him and run away with a college student named Kevin Brown. Floyd has never admitted to Sharon's murder and has not been charged with a crime relating to her death. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and click the bell icon to stay tuned.